Did you know that scientists have identified a phenomenon called infrasound, a frequency so low it's inaudible to humans, yet it can trigger hallucinations, intense dread, and the chilling sensation that someone is standing right behind you? In the United Kingdom, there are certain hidden towns where this frequency isn't just a theory, it's a living, breathing nightmare. We aren't just talking about creepy old buildings, we're talking about entire villages with histories so dark and atmospheres so heavy that even the people who were born and raised there refuse to walk the streets after the sun dips below the horizon. From the blood-soaked history of witch trials to modern-day sightings of things that defy logic, these 10 locations are the UK's best-kept secrets. Are these places truly haunted, or is there something even more sinister buried in the soil? Stay tuned, because the last town on our list is so disturbing it was legally erased from the map. Let's step into the shadows. Pluckley, Kent, the most haunted village. If you were to drive through Pluckley, Kent on a bright spring morning, you'd see a quintessential English village. Think red brick cottages, blooming gardens, and a peaceful parish church. But don't let the charm fool you. Pluckley holds a terrifying Guinness World Record as the most haunted village in Britain, and the locals know better than to linger near the screaming woods once the shadows start to stretch. The air here feels unnervingly thick, as if the atmosphere itself is holding its breath. For decades, residents and visitors alike have reported a staggering 12 official ghosts that seem permanently woven into the town's fabric. From the phantom of the highwayman run through with a sword at Fright Corner to the bone-chilling sounds of the screaming man who fell to his death at the local brickworks, the history here isn't just remembered, it's replayed. But what if these hauntings aren't just spirits in the traditional sense? Scientific researchers often point to a fascinating concept called the stone tape theory to explain the activity in Pluckley. The theory suggests that minerals in the ground, specifically limestone and quartz, which are prevalent in the Kentish soil, can act like a giant geological hard drive. It's believed that during moments of extreme trauma or high emotional energy, the environment, quote, records the event. Under certain atmospheric conditions, the ground simply plays back the recording, leading witnesses to see the same phantom carriage or hear the same agonized cries centuries later. It's a literal echo of the past, trapped in the very rocks beneath your feet. Walking through the center of Pluckley, you might feel a sudden drop in temperature or a prickle on the back of your neck, the classic fight or flight response, triggered by the environment's unique energy. This isn't just a town of ghost stories, it's a living laboratory of the unexplained. Whether it's the lady in red searching the churchyard or the monk wandering greystones, the village remains a magnet for the macabre. Does the idea of a geological recording make these hauntings more or less scary to you? Comment below if you believe the Earth can remember our darkest moments. And if you're brave enough to keep exploring the UK's most chilling locations, make sure to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss our next stop on this haunted tour. Whitby, North Yorkshire, the gateway to Dracula. Perched precariously on the jagged cliffs of the North Yorkshire coast, Whitby is a town where the line between the living and the dead feels dangerously thin. The atmosphere is dominated by the skeletal Gothic ruins of Whitby Abbey, which loom over the harbor like a silent sentinel watching the crashing grey North Sea. While most people associate the town with Bram Stoker, who drew inspiration from the Abbey's haunting silhouette to write Dracula, the local dread runs much deeper than Victorian fiction. Long before the first vampire story was penned, Whitby was whispered about in occult circles as a place of immense spiritual power. Many believe the town sits at the intersection of powerful ley lines, invisible tracks of energy in the earth, that converge directly beneath the Abbey's ancient stones.
These high-energy currents are said to act as a magnet for the supernatural, creating a thin place where the veil between dimensions is at its most porous. For those brave enough to climb the famous 199 steps that lead from the town up to the cliffside churchyard, the experience is often more than just a physical challenge. Visitors frequently report an overwhelming sensation of being watched from the shadows of the weathered headstones, even when the plateau is completely deserted. This isn't just a trick of the imagination, it's a documented psychological response to the town's unique topography and history. The churchyard itself is slowly sliding into the sea due to coastal erosion, and for centuries, locals lived with the macabre reality of coffins and bones occasionally being unearthed by the wind and rain. The salt spray of the North Sea carries a chilling dampness that seems to soak into your very bones, and as the fog, known locally as the Har, rolls in, the modern world completely vanishes. In these moments, Whitby transforms into a labyrinth of shadows and narrow alleyways where the history of shipwrecks, smuggling, and ancient rituals feels alive. It is a place that demands respect, where the raw power of nature meets a legacy of darkness, leaving every visitor with the lingering feeling that some secrets are better left buried on the cliffside. Imber, Wiltshire, the ghost village. Deep within the restricted Salisbury Plain, there exists a place that shouldn't be empty, yet it remains one of the most unnerving locations in the British Isles. Imber, Wiltshire is a town frozen in a state of permanent mourning. In 1943, at the height of World War II, the villagers were given just 47 days' notice to evacuate their homes so the Allied forces could use the area for urban warfare training. The residents left their fires burning and their dinner tables set, fully believing they would return once the dust of war settled. They never did. Today, Imber remains a hollow shell of a community, a collection of crumbling cottages and a solitary church, all guarded by a perimeter of rusted barbed wire and grim warning signs. The atmosphere is of profound, interrupted life, where the silence is so heavy that it feels like a physical weight pressing against your chest. What makes Imber so uniquely creepy is the sense of enforced isolation. Because it is located in the heart of a live military firing range, the town is strictly off-limits to the public for most of the year. When the gates are finally opened on select holidays, visitors find a landscape that feels post-apocalyptic. You aren't just looking at ruins, you are looking at a betrayal of the British landscape. The houses have no windows, no doors, and no life. Only the echoes of gunfire from nearby training exercises to remind you of its current purpose. It is a place where the collective grief of a displaced population has seeped into the very mortar of the buildings. If you are planning a visit, the practical stakes are much higher here than your typical tourist spot. You are required by law and for your own survival to stay strictly on the paved paths. The surrounding fields are littered with unexploded ordnance and decades of military debris. To step off the path is to gamble with your life in a way that is very literal. This layer of imminent danger adds a sharp, adrenaline-fueled edge to the already haunting silence of the village. Imber isn't just a ghost town because of the spirits people claim to see in the windows. It is a ghost town because it is a place where time was murdered by necessity, leaving behind a skeleton that the earth refuses to reclaim.
Pendle, Lancashire, the Witch's Shadow. Rising like a dark, hunched giant over the Ribble Valley, Pendle Hill is a landmark that radiates an almost magnetic sense of dread. The atmosphere here is defined by a low-hanging perpetual mist that clings to the slopes, obscuring the jagged edges of the landscape and making it easy to lose your sense of direction within minutes. This isn't just a place of natural beauty, it is a site of unresolved historical trauma.
In 1612, this region became the epicenter of the Pendle Witch Trials, one of the most famous and brutal instances of state-sanctioned execution in English history. 12 people were accused of witchcraft and murder by spirit, leading to a series of hangings that left a stain of infamy on the local villages, particularly the small town of Barley, which sits directly in the hill's shadow. The creepiness felt by visitors today isn't necessarily about jumping at shadows. It is a heavy, suffocating grief that seems to have settled into the very stones of the cottages. From a scientific perspective, the lingering unease in Pendle can be explained through the psychology of collective memory. Researchers have found that massive social traumas, like the public execution of a town's own residents, can become embedded in a community's cultural identity for centuries. This isn't magic, it's the way humans pass down stories, warnings, and a general subconscious tension through generations. In Barley, the architecture itself serves as a visual trigger for this trauma, with many buildings still featuring witch holes or symbols designed to ward off evil. When you walk these streets, your brain picks up on these subtle environmental cues, triggering a primitive alert state. The experience of Pendle is one of profound isolation. Even on a calm day, the wind whistling through the dry stone walls can sound like a distant human cry. Locals often describe a sensation of thick air near the summit, where the wind seems to die down into an unnatural silence. It is a place where the past isn't just a story in a book. It is a shadow that follows you, reminding you that the landscape remembers exactly what happened on those cold, desperate slopes over 400 years ago. Cannock Chase, Staffordshire, the UK's Area 51. Spanning over 26 square miles of rugged heathland and vast, dense forests, Cannock Chase is often described as the most concentrated hub of paranormal activity in the United Kingdom. The atmosphere within the woods is notoriously oppressive. Even on a bright day, the canopy is so thick that light struggles to reach the forest floor, and in certain sections, the trees grow crooked, twisting into gnarled skeletal shapes that defy natural growth patterns. This isn't just a place for a quiet nature hike. It is a landscape defined by unexplained phenomena that have earned it the nickname the UK's Area 51. For decades, locals and investigators have documented a terrifying array of sightings that range from extraterrestrial crafts to cryptids that seem to belong in a fever dream. The history of the chase is dominated by the legend of the black-eyed children, pale, youthful entities with charcoal black voids where their eyes should be, appearing to hikers and begging for help before vanishing into the undergrowth. This is joined by the local lore of the Pig Man, a humanoid figure with a porcine face that has been reported by terrified witnesses since the 1940s. While skeptics point to the forest's history as a military training ground to explain the strange lights in the sky, they struggle to account for the visceral, physical dread that visitors experience. Biologists suggest that the forest's unique topography creates pockets of stagnant air and specific acoustic echoes that can play tricks on the human inner ear, inducing dizziness and heightened paranoia. Despite its status as an area of outstanding beauty, there is a silent agreement among many long-term residents. You do not stay in the woods after the sun dips. The forest seems to swallow sound, creating a silence so absolute that your own heartbeat feels like a drum. It forces a question that tests the nerves of even the most hardened skeptic. Would you truly be willing to camp overnight in a forest where the locals, those who know the land best, refuse to enter after 6 p.m.? It is a place where the line between myth and reality is blurred by the shifting shadows of the pines, leaving you with the unmistakable feeling that you are never truly alone among the crooked trees. The Skirrid Inn, the executioner's court. Nestled in the shadow of the Skirrid Mountain in the small village of Llanfihangel Cucurni, there sits a building that served a dual purpose for over 900 years, a place of rest for the living and a place of death for the condemned. The Skirrid Inn is not your typical cozy Welsh pub. It is a structure defined by its brutal judicial history. During the aftermath of the Monmouth Rebellion, the inn was transformed into a makeshift courtroom presided over by the notorious hanging judge Jeffreys. Legend suggests that over 180 men were sentenced to death within these stone walls and promptly executed right in the stairwell. The atmosphere here is thick and stagnant, as if the air itself has refused to circulate since the 17th century. The most chilling physical evidence of this history is located on the massive oak beam spanning the staircase. If you look closely, you can still see the deep, grooved marks of the noose worn into the wood from the weight of the bodies. This isn't a museum recreation, it is a permanent scar on the architecture. Visitors often describe a vivid sensory assault the moment they step through the heavy oak door. There is a lingering scent of stale ale and old damp rope that seems to cling to the curtains and the floorboards, a scent that refuses to be scrubbed away by modern cleaning. This olfactory trigger is powerful, immediately bypassing the logical brain and activating the limbic system, which handles fear and memory. Locals in the village often speak of the Skirrid shiver, a sudden, unexplained drop in temperature that occurs even in the height of summer. The inn is a place of heavy shadows, where the creak of a floorboard feels less like settling wood and more like a deliberate footstep. It is a location that forces you to confront the darkest corners of human justice, where the transition from a pint of beer to a final breath happened in the span of a single afternoon. Standing beneath that beam, you realize that some buildings don't just house history, they strangle the present with it. Coolruss, Scotland, the 17th century time capsule. Stepping into Coolruss is like walking onto the set of a period drama that has been suddenly abandoned by its cast. This perfectly preserved royal burgh on the banks of the River Forth is famous for its picturesque whitewashed houses and winding cobblestone wynds, but there is an unnerving stillness here that suggests the village is trapped in a dream it can't wake up from. While it is undeniably beautiful, the atmosphere is characterized by a quiet that feels heavy and watchful. This isn't just a result of modern conservation, it is the lingering echo of a century defined by state-sanctioned terror. During the 16th and 17th centuries, Coolruss wasn't just a thriving port, it was a central hub for the brutal Scottish witch hunts, a place where the narrow alleys once echoed with the sounds of accusations and the frantic footsteps of the hunted. The creepiness of Coolruss is best understood through the unique insight of the Great Scottish Witch Hunt of 1597. This wasn't a localized event, it was a mass paranoia sparked by royal decree that turned neighbor against neighbor. In a village this small, the fear was intimate. The panic of 1597 saw Coolruss transformed into a literal hunting ground, where social bonds were dissolved by the fear of the supernatural. When you look at the tiny barred windows and the heavy iron jogs, collars, attached to the town walls, you are seeing the physical remains of a paranoid society. This historical weight creates a phenomenon known as place memory, where the architecture itself seems to vibrate with the tension of the past. Walking through the Coolruss Palace gardens or past the silent abbey, you might notice that even the birds seem quieter here. The village remains a time capsule not just of architecture, but of human psychology at its breaking point. It is a place that serves as a chilling reminder of how quickly a community can turn into a labyrinth of suspicion. Even today, as the sea mist rolls off the Forth and settles into the crevices of the stone walls, Culross feels less like a tourist destination and more like a sleeping witness to a history that is far from forgotten.
Dunwich, Suffolk, the city lost to the sea. On the edge of the crumbling Suffolk coastline lies Dunwich, a location that is perhaps the most literal representation of a ghost town in existence. Hundreds of years ago, Dunwich was a thriving medieval metropolis, a bustling seaport that rivaled London in size and influence. Today, it is a tiny, windswept village consisting of a few houses and a museum. The rest of the city, its palaces, its 8 churches, and its grand streets, is mostly underwater, swallowed whole by the relentless encroachment of the North Sea. The atmosphere here is one of haunting absence. You can stand on the beach and look out over the crashing waves, knowing that an entire civilization lies rotting just a few hundred yards beneath the surface. This creates a unique sense of geographic vertigo, where the landscape you see is only a tiny fraction of the reality that remains hidden by the tide. The local folklore of Dunwich is deeply tied to this watery grave. For centuries, residents have claimed that during violent storms, when the sea is at its most turbulent, you can hear the muffled ringing of church bells rising from the depths. This isn't just a spooky story, it is a psychological anchor for the town's identity. The bells of St. Nicholas and All Saints were real, and as the cliffs collapsed, they were the last parts of the steeples to vanish into the surf. The sound is said to be a harbinger of doom, a reminder from the deep that the sea is never finished with its work. This sense of dread is highly relatable because it taps into our primal fear of the unknown depths and the sobering realization of the fragility of human achievement. Dunwich is a visceral reminder that everything we build, our homes, our legacies, and our history, can be deleted by the raw power of nature. When you walk along the cliffs, seeing the literal bones of ancient residents occasionally protruding from the eroding soil, you aren't just visiting a town, you are witnessing a slow-motion apocalypse. It is a place that forces you to confront the unstable ground beneath your feet and the cold, dark silence of a world lost to the waves. Eyam, Derbyshire, the Plague Village. Nestled within the rolling hills of the Peak District, Eyam is a village of striking beauty that masks a history of unparalleled grimness. Unlike other towns defined by violence or hauntings, the creepiness of Eyam is rooted in a profound, quiet sadness. In 1665, when a box of damp cloth arrived from London carrying the bubonic plague, the villagers made a decision that remains one of the most heroic yet disturbing acts in human history. To prevent the Black Death from spreading to the neighboring northern cities, the people of Eyam, led by their rector, chose to cordon themselves off from the rest of the world. They effectively signed their own death warrants, choosing to stay and die in isolation rather than risk the lives of others. The atmosphere today is one of hallowed stillness, where the very air seems to carry the weight of a collective final breath. The practicality of visiting Eyam involves walking the plague boundary, a ring of stones where outsiders would leave food and medicine in exchange for coins soaked in vinegar to disinfect them. Standing at these markers, you feel the psychological weight of a community that was physically and socially severed from humanity. Perhaps the most chilling sights are the plague cottages, where small green plaques list the names of the families who perished inside. You can stand exactly where parents said their final goodbyes to their children through a hole in the wall, or where the Riley graves sit in the middle of a lonely field, the final resting place of 7 members of a single family buried by the lone survivor in just 8 days. There's a vivid, lingering energy in Eyam that triggers a deep sense of empathetic dread. It isn't just about the fear of disease, it's about the loneliness of the sacrifice. As you walk the quiet lanes, you realize that the silence isn't just rural peace, it's the legacy of a town that once went completely silent to save the world outside its borders. It is a place that demands a somber kind of respect, reminding every visitor of the thin line between extreme courage and absolute terrifying despair. Bodmin, Cornwall, the Beast of the Moor. The landscape of Bodmin Moor is a stark departure from the rolling pastures usually associated with the English countryside. It is a primitive, unforgiving wilderness defined by stark, jagged rocks and treacherous, swallowing bogs that can vanish a person in minutes if they stray from the path. The atmosphere here is one of ancient isolation, where the granite tors loom like petrified giants over a treeless expanse. While the history of Bodmin is steeped in the grim tales of its famous jail and the spirits of the condemned, the most pervasive modern dread comes from the legend of the Beast of Bodmin. For decades, locals and travelers have reported sightings of a large black panther-like cat prowling the moors, a predator that, according to official records, simply should not exist in the wild of the United Kingdom. This isn't just a campfire story. The frequency and consistency of these reports led to a government-commissioned study in the mid-1990s. While the study was inconclusive, the vivid imagery shared by those who live on the edge of the moor remains terrifyingly consistent. Imagine standing in the center of the moor as the sun begins to dip, the sky turning a bruised purple. In a place with no trees to hide in, you are completely exposed. Suddenly, the wind shifts, and you hear it, a low, guttural growl vibrating through the air, seemingly coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. Your brain, wired for survival, immediately recognizes the sound of a large predator, triggering an ancestral paranoia that makes the vast open space feel like a cage. The creepiness of Bodmin Moor is rooted in this sense of being the hunted. The landscape is so vast and the cover is so sparse that any movement in the tall grass feels like a threat. Locals often tell of finding mutilated livestock or discovering paw prints in the soft mud of the bogs that are far too large for any domestic animal or local hound. It is a place that reminds us that despite our modern world, there are still wild, dark pockets of the earth where humans are not at the top of the food chain. As the fog rolls over the jagged tors, the moor becomes a place of shifting shadows, where the line between myth and a hungry reality is as thin as the mountain air. The United Kingdom's beauty is often just a mask for a history defined by sacrifice, paranoia, and the unexplained. Whether it's the geological echoes of Pluckley or the predatory shadows of Bodmin Moor, these towns prove that some places hold on to their secrets with a terrifying grip. Which of these locations would you be too afraid to visit after dark? Comment the town name below. If you love exploring the world's chilling mysteries, hit the like button and subscribe to join our community of truth seekers.